Are you eating and exercising in sync with your body's natural rhythms? If you've ever wondered how to optimize your health and energy levels as a woman, this episode is for you. Today, we're diving into the incredible insights of Jillian Greaves, a functional medicine dietitian and women's health specialist, who will share with you how you can align your workouts and your nutrition with your menstrual cycle, how to fuel your body with the right macronutrients, and implement simple lifestyle habits to naturally balance your hormones. By the end of this episode, you're going to have the tools to feel more energized, feel healthier, and more confident in your daily choices. But before we dive in, if you're listening on the Apple Podcasts app or on Spotify, make sure you hit that follow button. And if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit like and subscribe down below. Also, you can book a free 30-minute health consultation with me today by going to nickcarrier.com. And you can select a day and time that works best for you so we can get on a Zoom call and we can chat and come up with a clear plan to help you achieve your goals of losing body fat or getting stronger. Book your free call today by going to nickcarrier.com. All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Best You podcast. Today, I am super excited to be joined by Jillian Greaves. Really excited to talk about a lot of different things when it comes to health, but specifically women's health, how to work out in alignment with your menstrual cycle, different nutritional tips with regards to your menstrual cycle and with regards to hormonal balance and things like that. And just for context, because I think it is relevant for people to know and hopefully insightful for people to know and relatable, as you just had your first son about 10 weeks ago, as we just discussed. And so a lot of this is probably things that you've applied yourself or applying yourself or will apply yourself. So really excited to get into today's conversation. But the way I want to start is exercising around your menstrual cycle. I've heard different things about this topic over the years. I'm not super knowledgeable about it. I also am kind of the person who is like, it probably matters to a certain extent, but it probably matters more from like the optimization standpoint than like more than anything, do what you like to enjoy exercise wise. But I want to hear your take on how important it is to exercise in alignment with your menstrual cycle and how to actually do that.
100%. So, and I love talking about this topic. There's a lot of misconceptions out there. I think about, cycle syncing, which has gained a lot of popularity in recent years. And, ultimately, I agree with you that at the end of the day, we have to enjoy what we're doing for workouts. And it also needs to feel good for our body at the most basic level. And, so if there's one take home message here that anyone leaves with, it's listen to your body and don't be afraid to make adjustments and to lean into that. When it comes to women's health and hormones, particularly women of reproductive age that are, cycling, there are cyclical shifts with hormones that do impact our body, impact how we feel, our energy needs, our immune function, inflammatory levels, all the things, our insulin sensitivity. So it is helpful to be aware of cyclical shifts, how that kind of manifests in your body specifically, and gaining some confidence with how to adjust accordingly in terms of workouts. So to be a little bit more specific, in general, we kind of break up the menstrual cycle into a few different phases. So we have our actual menstrual phase, which is our menstrual bleed. That's where we're having our period. We have our follicular phase after that. That's the period of time in our menstrual cycle where typically, hormone levels are at their lowest and estrogen levels are increasing throughout the follicular phase. We have our ovulatory phase where we actually ovulate, release an egg. And then we have our luteal phase. And that's where we produce progesterone, we produce estrogen, we have a higher hormone load, and then our cycle, then resets and ends in either pregnancy or a period. So these cyclical shifts with hormones, again, can impact the body and, impact how we, move in alignment with that, or even, how we fuel from a nutrition perspective as well. Do you want me to break down a little bit kind of some of the general recommendations for maybe what to consider during those phases?
Yeah, that'd be perfect. Perfect outline. I think that's perfect transition from here.
Perfect. Awesome. So generally in the menstrual phase, the period bleed, that is where, we have a lot of, blood loss, mineral loss. Women often tend to feel a little bit more fatigued, maybe aren't as energetic as they are in other, times of the menstrual cycle. That is typically a time where I recommend women really listen to their bodies and lean into, kind of lighter movement, lower impact movement. That being said, again, always pay attention to how you feel and, make adjustments based on that. But generally our menstrual phase is where, we might feel a little bit more called to kind of lighter forms of movement. And, as a side note, what I often see in practice is women kind of, plowing through workouts when they're not feeling their best, right? Their body's telling them one thing and they're like, oh, well, I signed up for that HIIT class. And so I need to go, bust my butt for 60 minutes when I'm actually feeling like I want to just go on a nice walk or do a Pilates class or something like that. The follicular phase is a time of the cycle where generally we have a little bit more like metabolic flexibility, as I refer to it. So estrogen levels are increasing, we're getting more energy. Inflammatory levels are a little bit lower in the body than they are at other times in the cycle. We tend to be a little bit more insulin sensitive. And our energy needs are actually a little bit, lower during the follicular phase. So typically this is a time where women will feel pretty good. We're feeling energized. This would be a time where you could lean into challenging yourself, doing things that are higher intensity. If you're focused on like strength gains and, building lean muscle, this would be a great opportunity to do that in terms of working with what's going on from a hormonal perspective in the follicular phase. As we get to ovulation, typically women tend to feel pretty good throughout ovulation, again, where estrogen levels are peaking. So again, great time to kind of challenge yourself if you feel really great throughout that ovulatory phase. As we get into the luteal phase, this is where I do find in general, women will benefit from paying attention to their bodies and making some bigger adjustments as needed. So after we ovulate, we produce the hormone, progesterone. We're producing estrogen. We have overall a higher hormone load. So the body is doing more work to break down, process, metabolize these hormones. Our immune system is actually a little bit more suppressed. We have higher levels of inflammation during this time in our cycle. So women are more, injury prone. And our body is actually a little bit more insulin resistant as well. So we're a little more insulin resistant. Our energy needs are increased by up to about 10%. We might notice we're hungrier, during the luteal phase. And then again, a little bit more inflammation, kind of higher hormone load that the body is processing and metabolizing. So this is a time in our cycle where, again, we may benefit from making some, slight modifications to movement to align with that. If our body is telling us, hey, we need to peel back a little bit, maybe this isn't a time where we're, trying to hit a PR with, weightlifting. And we may want to, again, lean into some of that lower impact movement, slower movements, walking, things like that in the luteal phase. So those are that's kind of a general breakdown of what's happening in the cycle and, some general recommendations there of adjustments that could be helpful. Again, I think it's really important to listen to your body. I think if a woman is generally, in good health, has healthy hormone balance, they're not super symptomatic, I think there's more flexibility there. If you're someone that is dealing with some symptoms in terms of, you're dealing with, miserable periods and significant, mood related, swings and anxiety cyclically, and, your skin's breaking out and your gut's a mess at certain parts in your cycle, those are essentially SOS signals from the body or ways that the body is communicating with us that like, hey, we may need to switch some things up to support the body a little bit better throughout these cyclical shifts.
Gotcha. That was a super great and thorough breakdown. Provides a lot of context for the ongoing conversation. That was great. I guess is there a similar overall kind of like approach when it comes to adjusting things nutritionally? You mentioned in the menstrual phase how maybe you're experiencing more fatigue and so maybe a lighter load and lower impact. Does that mean you want to I can't tell if more fatigue, does that mean we want to have a little bit more energy or have a little bit more food or a little bit less food? How would you kind of align your nutritional intake along these 4 different phases, if you will?
Great question. And, I think first and foremost, I would encourage women to make sure that their foundational nutrition needs are met. So are we, meeting our basic macronutrient needs? Are we meeting our basic, kind of energy needs? That is most important first and foremost. From there can definitely be some benefits to making tweaks or prioritizing certain things nutritionally based on the phase that you're in. With your example of the menstrual cycle or that bleeding phase, that would be a time where we may want to focus on incorporating, more iron-rich foods and just generally more mineral-rich foods. We may want to, increase up our anti-inflammatory intake. So, menstruation by nature is inflammatory. So the body's releasing higher amounts of molecules called prostaglandins, which are inflammatory molecules that helps the uterus to contract and to shed its lining. So we can kind of combat or counteract some of that by upping the anti-inflammatories, in our diet. So our bright, colorful fruits and veggies, our herbs and spices. So those are some things to think about. If you're someone that experiences more digestive symptoms, say in the, menstrual bleeding phase of the cycle, maybe focusing on warmer foods, easier to digest foods versus like a huge raw kale salad when, your gut needs a little bit of support. During the follicular phase, this is a time where, in general, again, with being more insulin sensitive, maybe we amp up our carbohydrate intake a little bit. Maybe we're leaning into that, higher intensity movement, or, we're focusing on those strength gains. So increasing, good quality carbohydrate intake. As estrogen levels are increasing, we can also prioritize certain foods that actually help the body with breaking down and metabolizing estrogens effectively, which can, mitigate some symptoms that pop up for women. For example, cruciferous veggies contain really amazing compounds that actually help the body with breaking down and metabolizing estrogens effectively. Even though estrogens are, hormones that we produce, we need them, they're beneficial. We still need to break them down and process them and, eliminate these kind of hormone waste products. So I'd say follicular phase, let's kind of amp up our, carbohydrate intake. Let's maybe focus on our cruciferous veg intake, which can be, really beneficial. In the luteal phase specifically, this would be a time where we may want to continue to prioritize things like, the cruciferous veg. We may really want to amp up protein intake in particular, given that we are a little bit more across the board, all women are going to be a little bit more insulin resistant. So, protein is really, really key for satiety and blood sugar regulation and kind of elongating that blood sugar curve. So amping up our protein intake can be really helpful. Protein, high quality animal proteins are also going to be really rich in great amino acids and B vitamins that help with that higher hormone load during that time of the cycle in terms of supporting the liver and breaking those down. And then I would say the luteal phase is also a time where we could hone in on those anti-inflammatories as well. Again, we're a little bit more immunosuppressed, inflammation levels are higher, so we can kind of focus on those too.
Nice. It's a masterclass today, Jillian. This is great. No, but seriously, super thorough breakdown. Really appreciate that. Taking a lot of notes, and I hope everybody else who's listening is as well. I kind of want to transition into, you talked about how before any of that, like make sure your foundational nutritional needs are met. And as somebody who is in the fitness space a lot myself, and I know you coaching a lot of clients who are health and fitness focused, we experience a lot of women who are constantly underfueling and not eating adequate amounts of their macronutrients. And so I kind of want to just like start generally. How do you, it's impossible to put a general number out there for like how many calories somebody should eat, because there's a lot of different things with regards to height, weight, activity level, etc., with regards to determining how many calories you should eat or how many carbs, proteins, and fats somebody should eat. But if somebody is listening to this and they have like maybe no idea how many calories they should be eating, maybe they've heard that they should go on a diet and eat 1,200 calories or, whatever it is. What is a good way for people to know, especially women, how many calories and approximately their macronutrients that they should be intaking?
It's a great question. And a couple things that might be helpful. So one, I will say 1,200 calories is enough for like a 6-year-old. So if any woman out there is trying to limit their intake, any adult grown ass woman is limiting their intake to 1,200 calories a day, you are under eating. I don't know anything about you, but I will tell you, you are likely under eating. And we see so much underfueling, under eating in practice with women. And it's, not only often preventing them from seeing goals, achieving goals with things like shifts with body composition, it's also directly negatively impacting their hormones, their thyroid function, sex hormone production, our stress hormones. So making sure that you are eating enough and fueling well every single day is so foundational. We can't bypass that. It's kind of a don't pass go situation in my mind. In terms of how to get a sense of how much your body might need, I might recommend pulling up like a TDEE calculator. So your total daily energy expenditure, TDEE calculator, input, your basic info, your level of activity, and that might give you a little bit of a benchmark of like, what am I aiming for? I guarantee you most women that do that are going to be a little surprised by how much, their body actually needs to function optimally. So I always tell women, we're not trying to eat enough to survive. We're trying to eat enough to actually thrive, right? And to feel amazing physically, to feel amazing mentally. So I think the TDEE calculator is a great starting point. Obviously, all of these tools are imperfect, but I think that's a great way to get a benchmark for how much we should be bringing in, based off kind of, some of your specific info. I would say in general, for some guidelines to give women, and again, you may be someone that needs way more than this, but as a starting point, I like to get most women to eating about 100 grams of protein or more per day. Again, some women might need much more than that, but I think aiming for 100 grams of protein is a good starting point. And most women we work with are not anywhere near that. So, that might mean trying to get about 30 grams of protein at meals and some additional protein at, a snack or two daily. When it comes to carbohydrate intake, I would say this is probably one of the more variable macronutrients in terms of an individual's needs. But one thing I will highlight is that in general, it's contraindicated for women of reproductive age to eat less than 150 grams of carbohydrates daily, in terms of actually maintaining hormonal and reproductive health. Are there situations where a lower carb, approach could be helpful, therapeutic in the right context? Sure. Yes. Of course, there's always going to be, context to consider. But if you're a woman of reproductive age and, you're just kind of doing day-to-day life and you're not even doing any, kind of intense workouts, or, you don't even have a regular workout routine at this point, I would make sure you're eating at least 150 grams carbs daily, and ideally focusing on carb quality there. When it comes to fats, I would say, again, thinking about, hormones, women's health, we may need much more than this, but as a benchmark, I do like to see clients getting above about like 60, 65 grams of fat daily, again, to make sure that we actually have the raw materials to produce our hormones.
Yeah. Is there, you mentioned how less than 150 grams of carbs is contraindicated to, optimal reproductive health and health for some women. Is that kind of similar to like 60, 65? You feel like, is there data that shows that less than that is going to be detrimental to reproductive health, hormone health?
Great question. So yes. And again, there's always going to be nuance to this in terms of, certain cases and what's going on with an individual. So are there cases where a lower fat approach or a lower carb approach would be more appropriate? Yes, absolutely. I always want to acknowledge that bio-individuality. But in terms of actually, again, fat is really foundational, and, cholesterol for being able to produce and synthesize our sex hormones. So in looking at things through that lens, that's where we'd want to make sure we're getting about, the 60, 65 grams of fat daily to support, reproductive health and sex hormone production.
Yeah. This is kind of so those are the baseline foundational needs. I love that, about 100 grams of protein per day minimum, less than, or 150 grams of carbs per day minimum, 60 grams of fats per day minimum. Again, keeping in mind that bioindividuality is a huge thing, and don't use those numbers as your religion. Like, just use them as a foundational framework, if you will. What do you find, I think from a practical standpoint, oftentimes people are really good during the week when it comes to nutritional stuff. Sometimes they're dialed in Monday through Thursday, sometimes dialed in Monday through Friday, and then Saturday and Sunday, or Friday, Saturday and Sunday, they fall off. Like, do you find that calories per week, macronutrients per week, are most important, or is it like just more of a balanced approach is most important? Again, this is kind of like mainly from an overall health standpoint, like hormonal health standpoint, obviously body composition as well. But like, do you find that if somebody, does 5 days really good, 2 days really bad, has much different impact on their overall health than like 7 days of pretty good and they're kind of equivalent?
I love that question so much. So yes, I do find that if there is like a feast or famine situation between the weekdays and the weekends, or it's, really kind of black and white, very different, it does have negative implications on gut and, hormone health. Certainly, again, thinking about body composition goals, all of that. But from the lens of the work that we do with women, where women are often experiencing, hormonal symptoms, gut-related symptoms, we will often see that feast or famine situation, weekdays versus weekends, create barriers with actually seeing, true progress with, symptom, resolution, or seeing good significant progress with symptoms. And that's not to say that every day is going to look exactly the same. And we always take a very realistic approach to nutrition. So there's no expectation in my mind that the weekdays and the weekends are going to look exactly the same. It's not realistic for most people. It's not realistic, for me. And I think it's important to, allow yourself flexibility, to have fun with foods, to go out to eat with friends, be social. But I do think it's important to consider what things are looking like as a whole. And, every Monday morning, do we feel like we're starting from scratch, right? We feel like crap, we're bloated, our skin's breaking out, we're fatigued, we're brain fogged, experiencing brain fog. That would be an indication in my mind that we might need to assess kind of what's going on between weekdays and weekends. And I'll actually say to clients often that, when there is sort of these big discrepancies between habits on weekdays and weekends, it's almost a mini form of yo-yo dieting, right? Yeah. So, and it doesn't typically feel great. So my recommendation there for clients is to, think ahead and look at your weekend and consider setting what we refer to as like anchor habits or anchor behaviors. So, maybe you're not going to do everything that you do during the week, but based on what you have going on this weekend, is there, 2 things that you could maintain that feel really good for your body that you could realistically, kind of continue to anchor yourself and to provide some stability throughout the weekend? And it's pretty incredible how just focusing on, a couple small anchors or habits, the positive ripple effect that can have with really supporting and stabilizing the body. For example, maybe one of your anchor habits is, I'm going to start, every morning this weekend with a well-rounded protein-rich breakfast. I'm going to make sure I have some things on hand, and I'm going to prioritize that breakfast. Maybe the rest of the day looks a little bit different, but we're anchoring ourselves with that breakfast. Maybe we're going to focus on incorporating joyful movement each day, or focusing on incorporating, bringing our water bottle around and, maintaining hydration throughout the day. It doesn't have to be crazy. Just focusing on those anchor habits will feel so good. And again, likely have that positive snowball effect.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love that. The phrase, anchor habits. I think that's great. And yeah, I was not trying to, I'm the same way, right? My weekends are definitely not the same as my weekdays. And I definitely allow myself to eat more, quote, fun foods or whatever, if you will. And I'm not as dialed in on the weekends myself. But yeah, I think there's definitely a lot to be said for figuring out what that balance looks like for you, and not to have it go from one extreme to another, but have some sort of regulation within that, because like you said, like, it definitely will have an impact on your gut and other things as well. I want to kind of like talk about probably a relatively prototypical female who, let's say they currently are at a point where they, let's say, want to lose 10 pounds. And they're currently have been maybe under fueling for a little bit. Let's just throw a number out there. Let's say they're eating like 1,400 calories per day right now. Let's say they go to a TDEE calculator and it shows that they should be burning about 2,000 calories or per day. But they're currently eating 1,400, and because they're eating 1,400 and not losing any weight, that means they're also burning about 1,400. Is the proper approach for somebody like that to ramp them up slowly from a nutrient intake, a fueling intake, and eating more and more to the point where you're actually at where you're kind of like projected to be from a energy expenditure standpoint at about 2,000, and then when they're maybe where they should be, then just start to kind of cut back from there? I guess what would be the appropriate approach for somebody who maybe had those particular goals?
That's spot on. So if you're eating 1,400 calories right now, you've been doing that for a while, and you realize like, wow, I've been, in a pretty big caloric deficit for some time. I don't recommend going out tomorrow and, just starting to eat 2,000, calories a day. That probably wouldn't feel good physically. But we, might end up with some, swings with weight, and that's obviously not the goal. I think there are certain cases when women have been chronically undereating where maybe a little bit of weight gain and, that safety weight is part of the process. But I think being intentional and even increasing caloric intake by, 100 calories per week in terms of like, increase to 1,500 calories a day and do that for a week, and then increase to 1,600 and, so on. So until you get to, that 2,000 calories. And I think, sitting there for a little bit, seeing how you feel, seeing how your body responds. And, then you can consider when it would be appropriate for, pursuing things like fat loss, or, doing a more intentional, kind of, caloric deficit for a short period of time. I think the one of the biggest mistakes I see women make is just chronically trying to eat less, and, chronically being in a significant, caloric deficit. And, over time, that's going to down regulate our, metabolic function. It's going to impact our thyroid hormone conversion. It's going to down regulate the production of sex hormones, which plays a big role with our metabolism. So, we want the body to feel safe and to pursue things like, fat loss or, weight loss in the context of, the body being well supported. Stress hormones are balanced. Blood sugar is balanced. Sex hormone production looks great. Thyroid is functioning properly. And that's again where I think women go wrong, is chronically trying to like work against themselves and just eat less. That's, sort of the theme that we see.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. A couple more questions I want to throw at you. The first one is kind of along the same lines of what we were talking about nutritional habits that you have for women who are like recovering or trying to restore hormone imbalance. Other than like potentially just eating more, I feel like that's kind of the blanket common recommendation. What other some maybe nutritional tips for restoring hormonal balance?
Great question. So, definitely the eating enough, I would say alongside that is blood sugar regulation. So blood sugar regulation is another kind of don't pass go situation. If blood sugar is wonky and imbalanced, that's going to disrupt our other hormones, our thyroid hormones, our sex hormones. So focusing on that blood sugar stability, and that's where we get a little bit more focused on, obviously lifestyle factors impact blood sugar too, but from a nutritional kind of standpoint, that's where we think about, okay, meal timing, basic meal composition, and really supporting optimal blood sugar that way. Other things I would think about, nutritionally for, restoring hormone balance, would be actual like quality of food that we're eating. We can meet our calorie and macro needs through eating a bunch of like protein bars and fake food. And it's not that there's no place for those things or, convenience items, But in terms of actually supporting hormonal balance, in terms of the synthesis or production of hormones and the metabolism or breakdown of these things, we want to think about all the synergistic benefits that like real food has. So eating, real food proteins, eating, deep nutrition carbohydrates in terms of, our starchy vegetables, our fruit, our legumes, our whole grains, our whole food fats. So really thinking about that nutrient composition in terms of what we're taking in with those calories as well.
Yeah. Along the lines of hormonal balancing tips, if you will, we just talked about some of the nutritional things. I'm a proponent of do everything in your control before trying to go to, external things to solve your problem. So like, for example, if your goal is to lose weight, don't take a supplement before you stop eating fast food. Like if you're eating fast food every single day, don't go to get supplements and expect those to solve your problem. So like, what are kind of maybe hormonal balancing foundational habits? So for example, it's like if you're sleeping 5 hours every single night, then don't expect necessarily your hormones to be perfect. If you're drinking a few glasses of wine every single night, don't expect everything to be perfect. What are some like foundational hormonal balancing habits that you want to see like laid down, if you will, before you start like seeking other kind of help?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And we always refer to this in practice, what you're describing as, women. And I will say, I get it because we live in a world where there's all these shiny things kind of marketed to us every day. But we always tell clients it's kind of, if you're skipping over the foundations, you're stepping over $100 bills to pick up pennies, right? That saying. And the foundations always come first. So when it comes to, hormonal balance in particular, I mentioned the blood sugar regulation and, nutrient quality and eating enough. I think those are some really core things from a nutrition perspective. Outside of that, I would say sleep and circadian rhythms are huge. So, sleep in terms of sleep timing, when we're going to bed, when we're waking up, sleep duration, sleep quality, these things are massive. Sleep is, the cornerstone of health. And if we are not sleeping, and this comes from a place of having a 10-week-old baby. So I want to acknowledge and recognize that there are external factors that may, impact this, and that's okay. We got to work with what, is going on in our life right now. But sleep is huge. When sleep is disrupted, our stress hormones go up, our insulin sensitivity decreases. So it's going to have this, big ripple effect on hormones. When I say circadian rhythms essentially run the show in the body. So circadian rhythms are, this roughly 24-hour cycle that all internal biological processes operate on, including, hormone production and kind of secretion. So one of the biggest regulators of our circadian rhythms and therefore our hormones is light exposure, light and dark exposure. And I think this is a huge one for people in our modern world where, ideally in the morning, we're going to get some exposure to natural sunlight. We'll absorb that into our eyes. It's going to stimulate the production of all sorts of, important hormones, support thyroid hormone conversion. Ideally at night in the evening, we are going to be exposed to, very little artificial light, which is sort of the opposite of what's happening in our modern world. So a lot of us wake up, we're not getting outside, we're immediately on our phones, the TV's on, we're, in our computer, we're on screens all day. And then at night, we're exposed to all sorts of, artificial blue light that is essentially confusing the brain and disrupting circadian rhythms. There was a really interesting study done. It's a little older. I think it was like 2012 or 2014 that basically took a group of individuals that had, were in good health, had healthy, metabolic parameters in terms of, blood sugar and, insulin, and basically took this group of individuals and disrupted their circadian rhythms for 3 weeks by keeping them up later and exposing them to artificial blue light at night. At the end of this 3-week study, excuse me, at the end of this 3-week study, these individuals had pre-diabetic fasting insulin levels, fasting glucose levels, and they experienced over an 8% decrease in their metabolic rate, in their metabolism in 3 weeks. with adjusting those habits, the bedtime, the exposure to blue light at night, things normalized also within a matter of weeks. So just to show you how powerful, kind of light regulation is. So I would say, focusing on circadian rhythms is really foundational. And if there's a way that in the morning we can get a little natural light exposure and we can delay using screens for even 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, that's going to be super supportive. At night in the evening, can we, be off screens 30 to 60 minutes before bed? Or if we have to be on screens, can we throw on a pair of, amber blue light blockers to kind of filter out some of that blue light? Doesn't have to be perfect, but if we can, consider screen use, artificial light, try to get some of that natural light exposure, that has a really profound impact on hormones. Nice. Circadian rhythms, sleep, blood sugar regulation, and kind of the nutrition pieces. And then the one other kind of foundation I would mention, or two other foundations I would mention rather, would be like neat movement, just basic breaking up sedentary time, not even considering the benefits of more structured workouts, but just, breaking up sedentary time, standing, walking around, and then also stress, nervous system support, which is a huge thing, obviously, for all of us. But again, thinking about sort of simple strategies, is there a way we can pause during the workday and do a little bit of deep belly breathing, or, get out for a short walk and, listen to some music that, brings us joy, creating little pockets for the nervous system, to get into that more relaxed state can also have a really positive impact. And, I feel would be a foundation.
Yeah, I love it. Well, and so many of those things kind of can work together, right? Like if you're regulating your blood sugar, if you're getting light exposure, if you're decreasing your stress and breaking up sedentary time, like that's going to help. All those will help each other simultaneously. So like all that stuff is great. A couple of things. One thought I had earlier is, and it's probably a little bit of both, but I'm interested to hear if when it comes to like females under fueling, let's take somebody, just for example, if they're eating 1,200 calories, where they maybe, quote, should be eating 2,200 calories. So they're maybe in 1,000 calorie deficit, versus somebody who is eating 2,600 calories, but they're burning like 3,600. So also in 1,000 calorie deficit, but they're eating a decent amount, but maybe they're just exercising a ton. Is the negative side effects because they're only eating 1,200 and they're just like eating very few, or is the negative side effects because there's this 1,000 calorie gap in between expenditure and intake? It might be a little bit of both, but I didn't know if one was maybe worse than the other.
That's a great question. And, I would say, I don't know if there's actually been, to my knowledge, any like research, comparing the two. Just like based off my experience and my sort of professional opinion, I would say they both aren't great. Ultimately, and there are, to your point, probably some differences there, but ultimately I think if we're just drastically undershooting our body's needs, whether it be meeting the level of physical activity that we need, to support kind of optimal functioning and recovery, or just like supporting basic needs outside of, movement, I think both are going to be pretty equally, detrimental from a female hormone kind of consideration.
Yeah. No, I would probably have to agree, even like not seeing any studies or anything like that, but it would seem like that would definitely be probably the case. Well, the last question I want to ask is just kind of more personal, since you're kind of undergoing this new transition stage of your life, if you will, is just like for some practical tips. I actually saw on your like a social media post that you made back in October that you and your husband prepped and froze like 40 days worth of meals towards the end of your pregnancy to set yourself up for postpartum. Like, first off, genius. Like, I hope that people listening to this like hear that, like, wow, that's so smart. Like, I can do that whether in any stage of life to help me out. But like, wow, so thoughtful and forward thinking. What are some other like maybe like tips that you've been trying to implement the best to your ability over these last 10, 15, 20 weeks as you are kind of nearing delivery and then postpartum now?
Yeah, great question. And I will say the food prep was the best time investment in my health and my postpartum recovery. And I say all the time, I think it's played, one of the biggest roles, if not the biggest role, with feeling really good, postpartum, which is, the body's obviously going through a lot of changes. And, I want to mention too, that prepping, 40 days worth of meals might sound crazy, but ultimately something like that can actually be pretty streamlined, where basically our approach was every time we're making a meal, we're going to make double or triple and, just freeze it. We're already cooking, we're already buying these things. And then just, planning to make larger batches. I say to women all the time, there's such a huge emphasis when it comes to, pregnancy and thinking about having a baby in terms of buying all the things for the baby. I need to decorate the nursery. I need to all the things.
So true.
You don't need all the things, and, the baby needs the basics. And, I think the best use of time, energy, resources is prepping for postpartum for the mom, making sure there is, really nutrient dense, nourishing food, readily available, and just creating that path of least resistance when you're going through these huge life changes and, hormonal shifts. I do feel strongly that nutrition can kind of single-handedly change that postpartum experience for women in terms of, how depleted women are, and how dysregulated they are. And nutrition can be a huge source of stability and just, provide a lot of support with repletion. So I would say that was the best thing that we did. And I wish we prepped even more. But that was a really great thing. I think another big thing for me with shifting into this kind of postpartum phase has been actually like a lot of mindset work, which, as in the work that you do is just a big component of, achieving any health goals or, healing goals when it comes to, the gut and hormones. And I've really had to kind of, show up and do some of that mindset work myself in terms of being okay with imperfection, where, I can't have the 2-hour morning routine that I used to have now that I have a baby. And my morning routine in terms of, doing a little something to fill up my own cup in the morning is about 15 minutes, 10 some days, So I think being okay with imperfection and, kind of breaking away from that extremism in terms of, all right, if I can't, do it fully, or I don't have all the time, I'm not going to do it at all. And I think being able to shift my mindset towards, the small ways that I can show up for myself every day might not feel huge in the moment, but these things, really kind of have that positive snowball effect. And it's really, kind of a bigger investment in my long-term health. So I'd say mindset work is the other piece.
Yeah. I love how you finished that. I think that's so important for, obviously super important for somebody who's just recently or is postpartum, but for everybody in general, because it's like people who listen to a kind of podcast like this are high achievers. And when they hear blood sugar regulation, make sure you're eating enough high quality food, sleep and circadian rhythm, they have these light, okay, like I got to do this, I got to do this, I got to do this. And then like that last part we talked about was stress. And so it's like, you don't want these things to increase your stress to where they're not even doing you any good, right? So it's like, I'm sure right now that you're not getting your light exposure every single day. Your sleep is not perfect. You're not maybe getting high quality food for every single meal of every single day. Like you're not probably aligning all of your exercise and your nutrition to each of your 4 phases. Like it's okay. It's okay. Imperfection is fine.
Yeah. And something we say to clients all the time is you don't need to be perfect to achieve results. And typically the pursuit of perfection is what creates barriers for people. So, and we have to remember that with these conversations, there's going to be, certain strategies and tools that you can, pick out that are going to fit easily within the context of your life. Amazing. If there's other things that, aren't going to work for you wherever you are, kind of in life right now, just leave it, just leave it. It's not for you right now. And that's cool. You can revisit it in the future, but work within the context of what life looks like for you right now. And, don't let perfection kind of get in the way of, just taking a step forward.
For sure. Definitely have to adjust based off the season of life that you're in. That was great. Great way to finish today. Jillian, this has been super informative, educational. I know we went a little bit longer than I originally said, but wow, this has been so good. I've been just enjoying it too much. You guys need to make sure you go check her out. Follow her on Instagram at Jillian Greaves RD. And then you can go to her website, JillianGreaves.com, to learn more about her work, her coaching, and everything like that. Is there any other good place where people should go learn more about you?
That kind of sums it up. Those are the places to find me.
Sweet. Awesome. Well, I hope you guys took notes today. If you want to go back, take more notes, do so. Don't let it overly stress you out and make it so that you feel like you have to be perfect, but also share this episode with a friend or a family member who you think would benefit from this. Share it with your significant other, share it with your wife, your girlfriend, your daughter, your mother, whoever it might be applicable to. This was absolutely just so great today. If you're not following the podcast yet on the Apple Podcast app or on Spotify, make sure you hit the follow button. And if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button down below. But other than that, Jillian, this was a blast today. Super great stuff. Appreciate your time.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
That episode with Jillian was so much fun. We got off the call and I was like, wow, you absolutely crushed that. I walked away with so many notes, front and back of the sheet of paper that I was taking notes on. It was just packed with actionable advice for optimizing your health as a woman, from aligning your nutrition and exercise with your menstrual cycle to making simple yet powerful hormonal balancing changes. Her practical tips are a game changer for anyone looking to better fuel their body, improve energy levels, and create long-term health. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure you hit that follow button on the Apple Podcast app or on Spotify. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit like and subscribe below, and make sure you share it with a friend or family member who you feel like would benefit from some of these practical strategies and tips. Also, remember, you can book a free 30-minute health consultation with me today by going to nickcarrier.com and selecting a day and time that works best for you, so we can come up with a clear plan for you to achieve your health and fitness goals. Go to nickcarrier.com to book a time today. Here are my 3 biggest takeaways from today's conversation with Jillian. Number 1, aligning your nutrition and exercise with the phases of your menstrual cycle can significantly impact your energy, your performance, and your overall well-being. Number 2, many women are underfueling, and understanding your macronutrient needs, especially protein, can help you really thrive. Third and finally, small, consistent lifestyle changes like prioritizing sleep and managing stress and having the mindset that you don't have to be perfect can have a profound effect on your overall health and your hormonal health. If you can do these things, you'll continue to get closer to the healthiest version of yourself, and ultimately, and most importantly, you'll get closer and closer to your best